My family abandoned me the second my sister started achieving things I never could. Now the same people who left me to rot are standing at my door, begging. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emma Hayes, and I grew up in a family where love felt conditional. I was the oldest daughter, but somehow, I never felt like I belonged. From the moment my younger sister Grace came into the picture, I was no longer the center of attention. At first, I thought that was just how things worked when a new baby arrived, but as we got older, the differences became impossible to ignore. Grace wasn't just the favorite, she was the golden child. Everything she touched turned into an achievement. She was beautiful, smart, and athletic, and my parents never missed a chance to remind me of it. If she brought home a ribbon from a track meet, it was framed and hung in the living room. If I brought home a decent grade, my parents barely looked at it. Grace played the piano once at a school recital, and suddenly my parents were telling neighbors she was destined for Juilliard. I loved my sister, but I hated the way they made me feel invisible in my own home. I tried, God knows I tried. I studied harder, I joined clubs, I even played sports for a while. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough. My mother would say things like, "Well, Grace already does that better," or my father would shake his head and mutter, "You just don't have the same spark." Imagine being a teenager and hearing over and over that you were somehow less, that you were the disappointment in a family obsessed with perfection. The favoritism turned into cruelty as the years went on. Grace would get new clothes, while I wore hand-me-downs. She had private tutors, while I was told to just figure it out. They bragged about her non-stop, while I was often left out of family photos. It wasn't just neglect, it was rejection, plain and simple. The breaking point came when Grace got accepted into a prestigious college on a full scholarship. You'd think that would be a moment of celebration for the whole family, but instead, it was the day they decided I no longer mattered at all. My parents sat me down, and I'll never forget the words my mother said. "Emma, we don't have the time or resources to waste on you anymore. You'll never be like Grace. It's time you start figuring out your own life." I was 18. No money, no plan, no family support. That night, they packed my things into trash bags and left them by the door. I wasn't even allowed to sit at the dinner table. Grace hugged me half-heartedly, but even she didn't fight for me to stay. I walked out of that house with everything I owned stuffed into 2 bags, and not a single person came after me. I remember sitting on the curb that night, staring at the house where I grew up, realizing I no longer had a family. They chose Grace and her success over me. They erased me as if I'd never been their daughter. That was the moment my life changed forever. The moment I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. You'll never amount to anything like Grace. We don't have room for failures in this family. Those words weren't shouted in anger. They were spoken calmly, like a fact my parents had already accepted. I remember sitting at the edge of the couch, my hands gripping the fabric so tightly my knuckles turned white. My father didn't even look at me when he said it. My mother nodded along, her arms crossed, as if this was some business decision they had both agreed on. Grace wasn't in the room, but I knew she wouldn't have argued even if she were. That conversation was the end of my life as I had known it. From that moment, I was no longer their daughter in any way that mattered. My parents stopped paying for anything, school, food, even basic needs. It was like I had been erased from their budget and their hearts all at once. I asked what I was supposed to do, and my mother's answer was cold. "Figure it out, Emma. You're an adult now. We can't carry you forever." The truth was, they had never carried me at all. But hearing it out loud, in that tone, burned. I walked upstairs to my room and found my belongings already boxed. They hadn't even waited for me to pack. My childhood was stacked in cardboard against the wall, as though they couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I tried to hold back tears, but the humiliation was so sharp it made my chest ache. That night, I dragged those boxes outside. The front porch light shone down on me like a spotlight, but no one came out to help. My father closed the door behind me without saying goodbye. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was emptiness. I felt like the floor beneath me had disappeared, like I was falling into some bottomless pit where no one cared if I landed. The street was quiet, and I sat on the curb for what felt like hours. I stared at the bags and boxes that contained my whole life. I thought about the birthdays I had spent in that house, the nights I had stayed up studying just to get a smile that never came, the countless times I had hoped for even the smallest gesture of love. None of it mattered now. All I had left was silence. Loneliness crept in quickly. I had no savings, no backup plan, no place to go. I wanted to scream, to beg them to change their minds, but pride stopped me. They had made it clear. I was nothing compared to Grace, and they were done pretending otherwise. I walked away from that house with my throat tight and my heart breaking. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving because stopping would have meant collapsing right there on the sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about proving them wrong or someday standing over them victorious. Survival was the only thing in my mind. A roof over my head, food in my stomach, a way to make it to the next day. That was all I had left to cling to. And as much as it hurt, I promised myself one thing. No matter how broken I felt, I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me fail completely. The first year on my own was nothing but survival. I grabbed whatever work I could find, waiting tables at a greasy diner, folding clothes in a department store, scrubbing floors for an office building after hours. None of it paid enough to cover even the basics, so I stitched together 2 or 3 jobs at a time. Most days, I was running on coffee and sheer panic. I learned quickly that hunger was an enemy I'd have to fight often. Some nights, dinner was a bag of chips from a gas station or nothing at all. When rent money ran short, I slept in my car with the windows cracked, praying no one would notice me parked on the edge of the lot. The cold seeped into my bones, and I'd lie awake listening to the sound of engines passing by, trying to convince myself I wasn't falling apart. The hardest part wasn't the exhaustion or the empty stomach, it was the voice in my head. My father's words repeated themselves over and over. You'll never amount to anything like Grace. I carried them into every shift, every interaction, like an invisible weight tied around my neck. When a customer snapped at me for bringing the wrong order, I heard my mother's voice agreeing with. When I looked in the mirror at my tired face, I saw proof of what my family had declared, that I was a failure. And yet, something unexpected started happening in those endless days of grinding. I picked up small lessons in every place I worked. The diner showed me how to manage chaos when 10 tables demanded attention at Retail taught me about customer behavior, how people spend more when they feel listened to. Cleaning offices after midnight, I saw how businesses ran from the inside, how every detail mattered to keep a place functioning. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was collecting tools piece by piece. I also discovered a stubborn streak in myself that I never knew was there. Every time I felt like collapsing, some hidden fire pushed me forward. I'd wipe down another counter, carry another tray, mop another floor, telling myself, just get through tonight. And then another night, and then another. Slowly, I proved to myself that I could endure more than I thought possible. The loneliness was sharp, but it also forced me to rely on no one but myself. I learned how to stretch $20 for a week's worth of meals. I sold old clothes, electronics, anything that had value, and realized I didn't need much to get by. Every mistake became a lesson. Every setback, another reason to push harder. Looking back, those years broke me down, but they also built something tougher. My body ached, my stomach growled, and my heart felt empty, but I kept moving. Without even knowing it, I was building the kind of grit that can't be taught in classrooms or handed down by parents. I was learning the value of my own effort, step by step, job by job. I didn't have comfort, I didn't have family, but I had something I had never truly felt before: independence. It was fragile, it was painful, but it was mine. And that was enough to keep me going. It was during one of my longest stretches at the diner that I met Mrs. Thompson. She was an older woman who came in every morning, always ordering the same black coffee and oatmeal with a slice of toast. At first, she didn't say much beyond a polite thank you, but over time she started watching me the way a teacher might study a student. She noticed things other people ignored, how I never stopped moving even when the place was chaotic, how I remembered details about customers, how I kept going no matter how exhausted I looked. One slow afternoon, she waved me over and asked about my life. Something about her tone made me open up in a way I usually didn't. I told her bits and pieces, not the full story, but enough for her to see I was carrying a lot on my own. She listened without judgment, her eyes steady on mine, and then said something I'll never forget. Hard work is rare these days. You've got it. You just need the right door to walk through. That door turned out to be an opportunity one never would have found on my own. Mrs. Thompson explained that she owned a few properties and had been considering selling one of her smaller cafes. It wasn't fancy, just a little spot tucked on a quiet street, but she thought it could be something if the right person cared enough to run it. At first, I thought she was joking. Someone like me owning a cafe? I barely had savings, let alone business experience. But she kept encouraging me. She showed me the numbers, walked me through how the business worked, and even offered to let me buy it on terms that made sense for someone starting with nothing. It wasn't a gift, she was clear about that. It was a chance, one I'd have to fight for every single day. The risk terrified me, but the thought of staying in dead-end jobs forever terrified me more. I scraped together every penny I had, took on extra shifts, sold what little I owned, and signed the papers. The first months were brutal. I spent early mornings prepping, long days running the counter, and late nights cleaning. There were moments I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But slowly, the place started to take shape. A few regulars came in, then a few more. Word spread. I put my energy into every detail, the menu, the way we treated customers, the atmosphere. Bit by bit, people noticed. The first time the cafe turned a real profit, I sat in the back office staring at the numbers with tears in my eyes. For the first time in my life, I felt something my family had never given me, pride. Not the fake kind built on someone else's accomplishments, but the kind that came from my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. I didn't need anyone's approval to know I had done something real. The cafe wasn't just a business. It was proof that I wasn't worthless, that I wasn't the failure they had painted me to be. For once, I didn't hear my parents' voices in my head. I only heard my own. And that voice said, "You did this." The cafe became the center of my world. Every dollar I earned went right back into the place. Instead of celebrating too soon, I poured my profits into better equipment, fresher ingredients, and small touches that made customers want to return. What started as me working the counter alone grew into something I could no longer handle by myself. I brought on one part-time worker, then another. Training them felt strange at first. I had spent so long being the one told I wasn't capable of anything, and now here I was teaching others. The business slowly found its rhythm. Mornings were filled with regulars grabbing coffee before work. Afternoons brought in students with laptops, and evenings drew families stopping by for something simple and warm. The steady flow gave me stability I had never known before. Rent was no longer a looming threat. I had savings for the first time. My car was old, but it ran, and I didn't have to sleep in it anymore. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, and that was more than enough. With stability came people. The employees I hired weren't just workers. They became friends. We laughed together over rush hour chaos, covered each other's shifts when someone was sick, and shared meals after closing. Customers I saw every day turned into familiar faces I looked forward to greeting. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I had no parents to call, no sibling to lean on, but in that cafe, I had built a kind of family I chose for myself. It was during this time of steady growth that whispers about Grace started reaching me. At first, I brushed them off. I didn't want to care. But news has a way of slipping in when you least expect it. A former classmate mentioned seeing Grace on television less and less. Another old neighbor said she had heard rumors about sponsorships being pulled. Grace, the shining star of my family, was struggling to hold on to the pedestal she had been placed on. The details varied depending on who was talking. Some said she had been dropped by a management company. Others claimed she'd had a falling out with people in her industry. What I knew for certain was that her career, once painted as unstoppable, was no longer as bright as my parents had bragged it to be. I didn't celebrate her downfall, but I couldn't ignore the irony. While she had every advantage, every ounce of support and praise, I had been left with nothing but scraps. And yet here I was, standing on my own 2 feet, keeping something alive that no one else believed I could build. The contrast was sharp, and though I didn't dwell on it, the thought lingered at the edges of my mind. Maybe success wasn't about being chosen as the favorite. Maybe it came from clawing your way up when no one was there to catch you. I kept working, kept building, kept surrounding myself with people who saw me for who I was instead of who I wasn't. My life was far from perfect, but for the first time, it felt like mine. Grace's shine didn't last forever. The girl who once seemed untouchable began to stumble in ways no one expected. First came whispers of a scandal tied to her career. What had once been glowing headlines turned into sharp critiques, the kind that stick and spread faster than any praise. Opportunities that used to line up for her began slipping away. Soon after, her marriage, paraded around by my parents as proof of her perfect life, collapsed publicly, leaving her reputation even more bruised. With the loss of work came money problems. Grace had lived large, always assuming success would keep pouring in, but without steady income, the lifestyle crumbled. My parents, who had poured everything into her path, started feeling the weight too. They had tied their identity, their pride, and their finances to her accomplishments, and now that she was falling, they were sinking right alongside her. I didn't hear this from them directly. They never reached out. Instead, word trickled through people who still lived near my old neighborhood. An aunt mentioned that my parents were behind on mortgage payments. A neighbor told me Grace had moved back home, unable to afford her own place anymore. Every story painted the same picture. The pedestal had cracked, and the golden child had been reduced to someone scrambling to stay afloat. When I first heard these updates, I expected to feel something sharp, maybe satisfaction, maybe even pity. But mostly I felt distance. Their troubles didn't touch me the way they once would have. They had made their choice years ago, and I was nowhere in that picture. When I had needed shelter, food, or even a kind word, they had given me nothing. I remembered sleeping in my car, while they were busy throwing parties for Grace's victory. I remembered counting loose change for meals while they sent her on expensive trips. Now the same people who turned their backs on me were floundering, and for the first time, I wasn't the one drowning. I didn't wish them harm, but I felt no urge to step in, no pull to rescue. Whatever storm they were facing, it wasn't mine to weather. Instead, I kept my focus where it had always belonged, on the life I had built with my own hands. Their silence back then had taught me the hardest lesson. No one was coming to save me, and that memory made it easy to stay on the sidelines. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where I was busy balancing invoices in the back office, while the hum of conversation filled the cafe. The bell above the door chimed, and when I walked out front, I froze. Standing there were the last faces I ever expected to see, my parents, and right behind them, Grace. For a moment, none of us spoke. Their eyes darted around the cafe, taking in the polished counters, the full tables, the small line at the register. My mother's lips parted first, a mix of disbelief and something I couldn't place. "Wow," she said slowly. You actually made something of yourself." The words weren't a compliment. They were laced with surprise, as if the idea of me succeeding had never once crossed their mind. My father gave a stiff nod, his gaze moving from the menu board to me, as though trying to reconcile the girl they had dismissed with the woman standing in front of him. Grace stayed close behind them, her shoulders hunched, eyes avoiding mine. They didn't waste much time before getting to the point. My mother cleared her throat, her voice softer than I remembered. "We're in a difficult situation. The house needs repairs, and your father's medical bills are piling up. We thought maybe you could help. Just a little, until we get back on our feet." My father added quickly, "It's only fair, considering everything we've done for you." The irony of that line nearly made me laugh, but the bitterness lodged in my chest held it back. Then Grace spoke. Her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "Emma, I need a job. Please. Just something here, at the counter, anything. I can't keep doing this." She looked at me with eyes that had lost the shine they once carried, and for a split second, I saw the sister beneath the pedestal. I stood there, caught between the past and the present. Old wounds pressed against the surface. Nights of rejection, words that cut deep, the image of me carrying boxes out of their house while they turned away. And yet, here I was, holding the power they once stripped from me. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to remind them exactly how it felt to be abandoned. Another part hesitated, the years of longing for their approval not so easily erased. My heart pounded as the silence stretched, my employees and customers quietly sensing the weight of what was unfolding. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the forgotten daughter on the curb. I was the one they had to come to, the one with something to offer. And the choice of what to do next rested entirely in my hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hands on the counter or demand they leave. Instead, I stood still, looking at the three of them, letting the silence press down until it became almost unbearable. When I finally spoke, my words were steady, sharper for the calm I carried. "You know," I said, "I remember everything. I remember the night you told me I'd never measure up. I remember dragging my things outside while you watched from the doorway. I remember going to bed hungry because you decided one child deserved more than the other." My eyes shifted to my mother. "You boxed up my life before I even had a chance to fight for it." Then to my father. "You said there wasn't room for failures in this family. And you met me." Their faces tightened, each word hitting like a stone. Grace kept her head down, but I wasn't finished. "Do you have any idea what it's like to sleep in a car when it's 20 degrees outside? To count coins just to buy bread? To work 3 jobs while hearing your voices in my head telling me I'd never be enough?" For the first time, my father flinched. My mother's eyes glistened, though she tried to keep her expression stern. Grace's lips trembled, but she didn't interrupt. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice low but firm. "You had a daughter who would have loved you no matter what. I would have stood by you, helped you, cared for you. But you abandoned me the moment Grace shined brighter. You threw me away. And now you're here, asking for help as if none of that happened." The room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. I let the pause stretch before delivering the line that had been sitting in my chest for years. "I don't owe you anything." My mother covered her mouth, as if those words were a physical blow. My father's shoulders slumped, the weight of his own choices finally pressing down. Grace finally looked at me, her eyes wet, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, please." But there was nothing more to say. They saw it now, the truth they had refused to acknowledge all those years. I wasn't the powerless outcast anymore. I was standing in front of them, stronger than they had ever believed I could be, and they were the ones left with nothing. News of that day didn't stay inside the walls of my cafe. It traveled quickly, carried through cousins, neighbors, and anyone still tied to the family tree. Soon, I was hearing secondhand reactions from every corner. Some relatives muttered that I was cruel, that no matter what had happened in the past, blood should come first. Others, though, pulled me aside quietly, their voices low, and said they admired me for standing firm. They remembered how lopsided things had always been, how obvious the favoritism was, and they admitted they were glad someone finally said what needed saying. The split in opinion didn't bother me much. What struck me more was how Grace unraveled after that day. Instead of finding a way forward, she seemed stuck looking backward. She carried resentment like a cloak, heavy and bitter. Whenever I crossed paths with people who had seen her, they spoke of her anger, how she couldn't stop comparing herself to me now. The girl who once lived in the glow of constant praise couldn't stand that I had built something solid while her own foundation cracked beneath her. My parents weren't much different. I never received an apology, not a real one. They circled around the truth but never touched it. My father sent a short message through a cousin, saying he wished things had gone different, but even then, he couched it in vague words, never naming what he had done. My mother, I heard, cried often, but in her tears was still a refusal to admit they had chosen one child over another. Regret hung over them, but pride kept them from opening their mouths to speak the words I had once longed to hear. For me, the emotions that followed were tangled. There was a sharp satisfaction in knowing I hadn't bent under the weight of their return. I had faced them and walked away on my own terms. That part felt powerful, almost freeing. But under it sat something heavier, a sadness that no victory could erase. I couldn't change the years of hunger, the loneliness of being cast out, the ache of waiting for love that never came. Success didn't erase abandonment. It only put distance between me and the wound. At night, when the cafe lights dimmed and the world grew quiet, I would sometimes sit alone and let it all wash over me. I didn't regret what I'd said, but the emptiness of what could have been still lingered. My triumph had come, but it was bittersweet, threaded with the knowledge that the family I once wanted would never exist the way I had dreamed. Looking back, I see how every step led me here. The girl who once sat on a curb with nothing but boxes and a broken heart is gone. In her place stands someone who built a life piece by piece, not with anyone's permission, but with her own two hands. I have a roof that's mine, work that matters, and people around me who chose to stay. That cafe became more than a business. It became a home, filled with laughter, stories, and a kind of belonging I never thought I'd find. I've learned that family doesn't have to mean the people who share your blood. It can be the ones who walk in when others walk out, the ones who see your worth without needing proof. My circle is small, but it's real, and that's more valuable than any hollow approval I once begged for. Do I forgive the ones who left me behind? No. Forgiveness isn't something I owe them, but I also don't let the past control me anymore. The anger that used to sit heavy in my chest has loosened its grip. I carry the memories, but I don't let them decide who I am. Their choices shaped me, yes, but they don't define me. The truth is, being abandoned was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. It pushed me to survive, then to grow, then to succeed in ways no one expected. And in that journey, I discovered something they never saw, that I was enough all along. I don't need reconciliation to close this chapter. I don't need their apologies or their recognition. What I needed, I found within myself. And standing here now, I can finally say it with certainty. I am not the failure they claimed. I am proof that even when you're left with nothing, you can build a life worth living. And that, in the end, is all the victory I'll ever need. Do you think I made the right choice by turning them away, or should I have let them back into my life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.